Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Rebecca Thorne, and I'm here today with Erin Rand, and we are going to be discussing our plotting methods or lack thereof. I thought that this would be a fun one to do just because I used to be like a historical chronic pantser, and Erin is like the most meticulous plotter you've ever met. So I kind of want to talk about like where we started in our writing careers and like where we've evolved to, because I don't think that our processes are the same, even that they were like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Erin and I used to be in a writing group together, and so like we kind of got to see each other's like development, I guess, over the period of a year or so. Now she's moved away, which is sad, but anyway, I'm excited today to kind of get going. So welcome, Erin.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting because I do think that we have like ways where our writing processes are very similar, but then like also like totally different.
Like night and day. Yeah, like night and day. I think you're probably like on the complete opposite side of the spectrum in a lot of topics than I am, which is why I was like, this will be fun. I almost wish that we had a current pantser here, like because I was a pantser, but now I definitely think that I'm a lot more of like a planter. Like I've done videos about how I do like my 5 sentence plotting method, and that kind of goes down the line for me. So I almost wish that we had a third person here who was like a hardcore pantser. So if anybody is a hardcore pantser and is in the comments and would not mind being added to the stream, feel free to hit us up, because I do think that we could definitely add you in. Anyway, okay, so let's talk like origins. Erin, where did you start when you started writing?
I think that, I had a little bit of a like pantser, like more of a planter. I think my first book that I wrote, I had like an idea of the concept and I had characters that I like wanted to write about, but I didn't have like a very good idea of like what plotting and structure should look like. So I just pantsed it, and then there was like not really a plot or like any tension to the story. Mm-hmm. And so I think like as I have written more, my dog is here.
I know. My dog is also. Oh, you can't see him. Oh my God. Oh, hang on. We have to do it. We have to do a dog introduction.
Yeah.
This is Sammy. You guys have all met him before. He's very confused.
Hi. Are you looking at the ping pong table? There we go. He's kind of hiding.
Sammy loves to FaceTime, so if you put Oz on the screen, he'll stare.
Oz, do you want to be on the screen? There you are.
Who's that? Do you see that? He totally sees him. He's just like, what is that? Oh, that's an animal. Look right there. What is that?
Hi. Oh, hi. Oh my gosh. My headphones can't hear anything. All right.
This is quality content and exactly what people are here for. So,
but as I was saying before my dog interrupted me, I think that as I have like learned more about plotting, I've gotten more interested in doing that. And so I definitely am a pretty thorough plotter nowadays. And like my last project, I was like, I'm just going to pants because I used to do this and I feel like I can make it work. And then I was like, just kidding, I can't. So I'm definitely a planner at heart.
Yeah. I had a similar story, but I didn't learn from it. Like, I think everybody has like, I don't know, maybe not everybody, but I definitely like my very first book I wrote when I was 13, and it wasn't finished, but I call it a book because it was like 30,000 words, which for a 13-year-old is like, that's a lot of words, man. Like that was really, that's a lot of words. I mean, it was mostly like stream of consciousness, but it was like I called it Dragoness, and it was about a girl who found a dragon egg and just like got to raise a dragon. And like, what else would I want to write about at 13 years old, you know? So I wrote this like 30,000 word book, and then I gave it to my sister, and I was so proud. And I was like, Paige, read this. And she just kind of looked at it and she goes, well, this is great, Becky, but what's the plot? And it was just like this like glass shattering, just like soul crushing moment where I'm like, what do you mean? What's the plot? She finds a dragon. And Paige just was kind of like, and like, you know, and then I realized that was an inciting incident. That wasn't actually a plot, which I had no concept of at the time. But I had that moment where I was like, oh, wow, I just wasted. I mean, not wasted, but like I just spent 3 or 4 months writing this 30,000 word behemoth at 13 years old, and it has no plot. And you would think that I would have learned to do what you did, which would be to then plot out my books. But no, the process was it for me. I was just like, I wanted to just dive right in and get started. So I switched gears and I worked on this one. I got it self-published.
Nice.
For my little 13-year-old, I was like, ooh, fancy. Anyway, so I wrote this one, The King's Library. As you can tell, it's quite thin. I think it was only like 40,000 words or like 37,000 words or something. But this one actually had a plot. It was about a girl who wanted to get into the King's Library. And I honestly couldn't tell you any more about it because I wrote it when I was like 14 and I didn't get to page. So, but yeah, like I think over time I was able to kind of figure out how, how you kind of take an idea and develop it into something that is able to sustain you throughout the long term. But for me, it's always kind of like, if I get to a scene and I don't know what happens, I'm like, throw in an explosion, kill somebody, like, let's see what happens, and that discovery writing was really, really fun for me at the time. But that is no longer the case for me now. So, oh, hi, Sammy. So tell me about like the first book that you felt like you plotted really, really well. Like, what is your book writing history?
So I think I wrote like my first completed manuscript when I was like a freshman in college, and that was like not plotted. I don't know what is the first. I think that I've just sort of gotten progressively more of a planner every time. But I feel like lately my manuscripts have had like probably like what I start with is like a concept. So I don't know, what do you start with? Do you like have characters in mind, or?
So I usually have like a vague, I don't usually start with characters. I'm definitely a plot-based novelist first. So I usually start with like an idea, like I want to write about a murder, or I want to write about a boarding school or something, like a setting that I then kind of am like, okay, but what happens if like, I don't know, like an alien invades the boarding school, and then like there's my plot, and then I'm kind of like, okay, now what characters would best suit this, and then I add them in, and then I just kind of go.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I am too. Like I started for like my current manuscript, I started with the concept that I knew I wanted to do something Regency, but I didn't know what. And then I kind of decided I wanted to do this alien story. And so then you think about like, okay, what kind of character would be interesting in this story? Right. And you sort of figure it out from there. But because I am not like a person who just like has tons of ideas all the time and they just like plots come to me. I'm definitely not like a plot first writer. Once I figure out my characters, I'm definitely more of a character driven writer, which I think is why I have to plan so much, because if I didn't, like, it just, I don't think that it would like materialize while I wrote. So I have like the vague concept, and then I do a lot of like stream of consciousness writing to sort of figure out the details, like what the plot is actually going to be, and who the people are going to be in it. And then once I have that, I probably will do like up to 5,000 words of stream of consciousness writing, not in one session, but like sort of, over like a few weeks, I'll just sort of rough it out. And then once I have that, I will sort of start like the actual like plotting part, which is sort of a modified snowflake method, which if you don't know, Becky's talked about this, but like, you start with like one sentence and then you flesh it out to 5 sentences, and then you take each of the 5 sentences and you make it a paragraph. And I usually get about that far. And then once I get that far, I'll do like a scene by scene breakdown before I start writing.
Oh, so much.
So I usually,
how many scenes do you usually have in a book when you plot it?
So when I plot it, I usually have like between 20 and 25, but then when it like is actually written, and so I'll have like 20 to 25 scenes with like probably like 200 to 300 word descriptions for each of them. And then like as I write, usually I'll find that I like actually need more, and so it'll expand to like 40 or 45 like scenes, which then kind of turn into chapters. But I don't really think about chapters until I get to like the very end. So
okay, so have you ever read Save the Cat?
I have not.
Okay, so Save the Cat, here we go. Just all my writing books. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, this is Save the Cat. It is written by Blake Snyder, and highly recommend it. They actually have one. This is for screenwriting, but they have another one that he did for novel writing. And if you don't know, screenwriting is actually a really useful tool for novelists as well, because the structure of a movie is just about the same as the structure of a novel. The only difference is that they have to combine things into an hour and 30 minutes. Like they're their book has to be an hour and 30 minutes. So like every scene has to have a point. Everything has to be very snappy. Novelists have a little more time to kind of meander and develop characters and this kind of stuff. But like screenwriters, like if you can nail screenwriting, I actually think you'd be a really, really good novelist, just because the screenwriting is so snappy and so like intense. That when you go to write a novel, you're just going to be like, wow, I have so much time to accomplish everything, you know? Like screenwriters, like they're talking, they usually get like every page is usually like a minute, I think, and it's like a 90-page script, and that's what they get. So highly recommend this book if you've never read it. It really breaks down a lot of the different like methods. Like I went through and highlighted because I'm a dork. But it really breaks down like a lot of different methods for writing. But the thing that I didn't love at the end of it, and this is just such a pantser thing, like at the end of it, they have this thing where they're like, oh my God, you made it to the end. And then they talk about, I thought it was in this one, maybe it's in the novel one. There was a breakdown where they had like a scene by scene thing where it was like really intense. And they were kind of like, if you're going to be writing your novel, then like, you know, page number 1 needs to accomplish this. Page number 2 needs to accomplish this. And now I'm wondering if it wasn't this book, it might have been one that was based off of this. I read another book called My Story Can Beat Up Your Story. And it's basically Save the Cat on steroids. And I highly recommend that one too, but I only have that on ebook. But that, you know, either way, one of them I read that had like a breakdown where it was like minute by minute, here's what your book needs to accomplish in these different scenes for this genre. And I was just kind of like, oh my God, like it was just like so formulaic for me that I just like, I couldn't even, like I put the book down. I was like, this had a lot of good concept ideas, but like, I will never plot my book to that capacity. Like that's too much. It's too much.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you use beat sheets, which is basically what that is, but like I find beat sheets really interesting from like a theoretical perspective, where like it's like a good thought experiment for like, this is sort of generally how your book should move, and here's like a way that you can accomplish it, like getting from beginning to end. But I like personally, I don't think that I could ever like write to a beat sheet. I mean, like, and I have this huge plan, but I also consider myself like kind of a discovery writer, where I am like still figuring out a lot about the book while I'm writing it. And so like trying to match it to a beat sheet, I just like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and I kind of think that like, I think that's kind of an interesting thing, like kind of like with LGBT, you know, like you're not just, you know, bisexual or just, like a lesbian, like there's a spectrum, you know, and I kind of think for writers, there's a spectrum too, you know, like you can be the hardcore plotter or you can be the hardcore pantser, but like I think most people kind of fall somewhere along the middle, you know, like I'm probably closer to like the pantser side of plantsing, you know, which would be right in the middle. And you're probably more like the plotter side of plantsing.
Yeah.
But like, every book requires something different. And I think that learning your style and experimenting with new styles is how you figure out what kind of a writer you can best be.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, how you kind of streamline what you're doing, you know, like I'll give you an example, like the book that I'm writing right now. I'm writing a lot of books because I'm all over the place with COVID, but the book that I'm writing right now is a new adult, like a witchy contemporary book. And it's really weird. I basically have a good omen for like the writing style, and it's written in third person omniscient, which I've never done.
Can you hear it? I don't know what's happening up there. There's some crazy barking happening.
Oh my God, I heard him howl. Was that him howling?
That was Oz, I think.
Oh my God. Meanwhile, Sammy's gone. He doesn't want to be in here for this. Which is good, because if he hears all of it, he will start going, and then he'll run outside, and life will be crazy. Anyway, yeah. So the book is like third person omniscient. I never do third person omniscient, but with this specific book, in this specific instance, it was necessary because the book is told over like 3 different overlapping timelines with the same 2 characters. So it's kind of like when they're babies, when they're like teens, and then like a little later, like when the book actually takes place. So those all kind of like weave throughout. And because the book is so intricate with its overlapping plot, like timelines, there was no way that I could really pants this. Like there was just no way. So like I had my friend come over and we did like a whole night plotting session where we kind of knew exactly what we were going to do with this book. And then I went over after she left and I took like the little, like we drew out a timeline of like the major events that happened throughout. And then I like circled them all and was like, okay, this is the one timeline. This is the second timeline. This is the third timeline. And then I took that on Scrivener and I wrote like a beat sheet. kind of thing, where it was like, okay, like I want this chapter to be about this, I want this chapter to be about this topic. And now I know that like when I finish my book, I have a very cohesive idea of these two characters' lives from beginning to end. Poor Oz. He's just like,
he likes to bark it when there's people outside.
He's so upset. He's just like, how dare you pass by my hallway?
Yeah.
This is my hallway. No, you don't. Anyway, so that worked out really well for me for this specific book, just because like I would never have known otherwise. But like I don't go more in depth than one sentence for like what it is. Like this one is like the chapter that I'm about to write is like, you get to see her parents again at home. And it's like, I know what I roughly need to accomplish in here, but like I don't have a setting for that yet. I don't have like a goal for that chapter other than that I need to show her parents at home, you know? And so I think that that's kind of where like I fall in like the plantser-ish, but like plotter scale. Cause like even with this really intricate book that I need to do a lot of plotting with, I'm still refusing to plot because like, no, I don't want to.
Yeah, I think that like the book that probably made me into like a planner was a dual POV book where both the POVs had sort of intersecting but not like necessarily overlapping stories. And so like figuring out like how and where those stories intersected and just like what they were each doing when the other was like doing something else. It like really necessitated more planning than I had ever done before. So I have no idea what he's barking at.
So upset. I love it. Yeah, I definitely think that that's a good thing to remember. Like if you're writing something that seems like it's going to be significantly more complicated, that might be the time for the plotter or the pantser to like break away from what they're used to and try something new. And that's where I kind of think that like plotting books like Save the Cat, or like I have a book called Plot versus Character. That one's really useful. There's one called Story Trumps Structure. And that one's really useful too for like story structure and like getting the basic idea down. But I kind of think that like the beats that you need to hit are important because that really helps with pacing of a story. I think that if you're not, even from a like a pantser side, if you're not plotting out the major events of your story, you're going to have a really big problem with pacing because you're just going to be meandering through the whole thing, which is great until you have to do it. And then you have to start from word zero and basically rewrite the entire book because you didn't know what it was before. Oh, guess who hears you?
Yeah, and no, it's interesting. Hi, Sammy. It's interesting. I do think that like I'm not a craft book person, which I know that you definitely are. And I think that it's probably if you are a pantser, I think that those craft books become even more valuable because you don't necessarily have that like structure inside your head. And so like having that like external structure in your mind as you're sort of going through your story is like even more valuable, I think, to like have that context.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you're a pantser, I mean, I found a ton of value. Like there was a 2 or 3 year period where every time I went into a bookstore, I bought a new craft book. I mean, and I gave most of them away. So like what I have on that top shelf, they're all craft books, but most of them I gave away. So I think that it is really important for all writers to be able to understand how a story is structured. But some writers, you know, when you're plotting, I do think that that is like a practical application of story structure. Whereas like pantsers, just like you said, we just don't get that, you know, like we just kind of go and like we use the headlight method where it's like, you know, you can't see further than 5 feet in front of you, but you can get the whole way there, you know, and then you get to the end and you look back at where you drove and you're just like, whoa, and then you're like, wow, I've got to rewrite.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think that probably the more you know about craft and like the way story structure works, the easier it becomes to pants. Like if you're pantsing a book and you know a ton about story structure and it's all up there in your head, even if you don't have an idea of like how it applies to like what you're writing at the moment, it like sort of, you have like that GPS in your mind the more you know about story structure.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It does become kind of more innate just because it kind of just is like compartmentalized in the background once you kind of understand how that works.
And I feel like the more that I write and the more that I edit and the more that I figure out about story structure, I think that like my process sort of in plotting has sped up as well.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk timelines. We talked about speeding up. And I know where this is going to go. So let's talk about how long it takes us to finish a novel, the pantser versus the plotter. Because obviously plotting is a lot more intensive, but I do think that it has to do with the individual's writing style as well, like the way that they approach writing. So tell me about how you write.
So if I am plotting, I will probably plot for about 3 months before I actually start writing. And that's not like, I'm not like doing it every day. I'm probably like, my personal writing like schedule is that I write maybe 1 or 2 days during the weekday and then on the weekend. Hold on, I'm gonna mute my thing and call him.
Sammy is just like looking, you can't see him, but he's like looking at your screen. He's so cute. Go on. Go on. Go on.
I don't know, he didn't come down here, but
Yeah.
he seems to be quiet. So
Sammy is going to join us for a minute.
Hi, Sammy.
Hello. Hello. Oh, he sees you. Oh no, he sees himself. He's looking at himself.
He's like, who is that dog?
Yeah. So you were saying.
So yeah, so I probably plan for about 3 months, and my schedule is that I usually probably like do serious writing work like maybe 3 days a week. Like I'm not doing it every day. That's not how I work. And then like once I'm drafting, I find NaNoWriMo really valuable, and I basically like that is when I get the bulk of my drafting done, like no matter what. So I try and sort of plan it around NaNoWriMo, so I'm plotting ahead of time, and then I get like 50,000 words done in Nano, and then it'll probably take me 2 months after that to like actually finish the draft and like have the end. So I probably finish around like January or February if I do like Nano in November.
Right.
And then I let it rest. I will not look at it for like a month to 6 weeks. I just will put it away. I find that really valuable. And then I edit after that, which takes a long time.
I was like, so tell me about your editing process.
Yeah. So what I do is I print it out like a physical copy, usually just sort of like on a ringed binder, just like regular paper, not like in like a book form, just sort of like a notebook. And then I will read it and make notes, but I like doing it that way because you can't make changes. You have to like take in the whole thing and see what the whole thing looks like before you like go in and make changes. I think that if I tried to edit on like my word processor, I'd like start reading chapter 1 and I'd be like, oh, I need to change this. And start making changes, and then I get to like chapter 7 and be like, oh, well, the changes that I made in chapter 1 don't mean anything because I wasn't looking at the whole big picture.
Right.
So then I do that. I take my notes. When I start draft 2, I start blank page and basically I will do like a side by side of the first and second draft, but like start blank page, and I do that twice. Basically, I do that process twice, and now I am in my current project, I have done those 2 passes, and now I'm sort of doing more of a polishing pass. And the whole thing this time has taken me about 2 years from like plotting to this. It's over 2 years. So it's a long time. I'm definitely a slower writer.
Yeah. Yes, you came back. Yeah. Somebody's actually sitting on my chair over here because I have my standing desk up. So Sammy is now sitting on my chair, just like staring at my screens like, dogs are so funny. Anyway, yeah, okay. So my process is different than that by a lot. So when I go through, I get an idea in my head, and I usually kind of mull it over for like, and I can mull it over from anywhere from 2 weeks to a year, depending on what I'm currently working on. So like, I don't let myself interrupt a project once I get like dedicated to a project. And in the first like 10 or 15,000 words, I don't really count that being dedicated because I'm like more trying out an idea. But once I get to like 20,000 words, it's like, this is what I'm working on, and this is what I will be submitting to my agent. So like, I don't change once I get to that point. And I did that because as a pantser, it was very easy because I didn't have a lot invested in it. By the time I got to 20,000 words, it was always really easy for me when I was younger to like get distracted by the shiny new unicorn idea. And I'd just be like, oh, that sounds way more fun than this, and I don't want to do this anymore. So like, I went through a period from like 17 years old to like 24 years old, where I wasn't finishing anything. Like my college years, I didn't finish anything. I just had fun coming up with all these ideas. And I've got like pages and pages of ideas on my my hard drive, which is useful because I still go back and I pull some of those sometimes. But like as far as my actual accomplishments went, I was like, wow, I'm never going to get published because I haven't finished anything recently. Like I have nothing to submit if I was going to start to query. And that was kind of where it like ended up, So for me, it was kind of like I think about it for a while. I don't let myself interrupt. I just write down those ideas on a document and then save them for later. And then when I'm done with a book during my breakdown period, like you take 6 to 8 weeks, I take about a month, 3 to 4. And during that period, that's when I pull open that document and like look at the new ideas that I had over the year and decide which one has like the best value for my time. And then I'll kind of start writing from there. This year has been really weird. Hasn't really, Sammy's back up again. This year hasn't really been anything like crazy intense just because of COVID. Like I haven't really written the way that I should be writing. But normally I come up with an idea in like April, and then like I'll kind of write like I'll think very distantly about it over the summer, where it's not like a focus. It's just kind of like in the back of my head ruminating, And then come like July, I usually jump in for Camp Nano, and that's when I kind of start like typically getting an idea down on paper. And then I'll write it in about a month. The books I'll usually write about a month and a half. And then I'll edit from like, I'll put them down for 3 to 4 weeks, give them to my beta readers, whatever. And then I'll come back and edit in earnest. And I can usually do the editing process fairly quickly. Like my editing process is not like yours. I do like I'll get like the finished manuscript and I'll send it to my editor or to my, writers or my readers. And they give me all their list back. Like we'll sit down and have like cocktails, and they will just spend like the entire hour and a half just like drinking and like telling me what sucks about my novel. And it's
so sorry to interrupt. Do you like give your manuscript to betas like basically after the first draft?
Yeah. Sometimes. So I will always do at least one read through before I give it back to my beta readers, but I never print off physical copies because I'm poor. Not poor, but like I don't want to spend the money on.
Well, see, I only print them out for me. I don't print them out for like other people. I know,
but like even like the physical, like I have a normal printer. It's not like a laser printer, so it would take me forever to print an actual book, because they're usually like 300 pages, and like my printer doesn't do double spaced double-sided very well.
So. I order them from FedEx, and it's like $15. So that's my pro tip.
From FedEx, it's like 35 or more.
You have to change the settings so that you do the super cheap paper. That's what I do.
Okay, so maybe I'll start doing that because like everything that I've looked into has just been so expensive that I'm just like I can't.
You can do the super cheap settings and then you find a coupon. That's my method. I don't spend a lot of money on this.
Maybe I'll try that next time. But yeah, so I don't print it off. I like actually looking on my computer screen and like being able to make like sentence changes, because I'll read through one time and I'll be like, as I'm reading through, I'm able to keep the big picture things kind of like compartmentalized, but I also like to change like the story structure where I'm like, or the sentence structure where I'm reading and I'm like, this sentence was a fragment. This one doesn't make sense. This one lost its impact because I did this same kind of sentence 17 other times in this chapter, and I'll go through and I'll start changing those. But then I usually send it off to my beta readers fairly quickly. Now I will say my beta readers are kind of unique because they're my old high school friends and they don't write. So like they have written before, they're very familiar with story structure because they're friends with me and I talk about it all the time, but they don't write themselves. So they read my stuff for free. And I don't usually have to do anything in exchange except be their friend, which is like very unique. Usually you have to do like a tit for tat thing. Like if you're asking somebody to read your stuff, you better be reading their stuff too. And you better be providing the same kind of feedback you're expecting, because that's what is good for a writer. But I don't do that because I'm very lucky. So I usually will give it to Chrissy, my main beta reader. And then I'll usually give it to Audrey, my other beta reader. And then when I get it back from them, I have a couple other friends that have agreed over the, if I tell them, a couple weeks in advance, they usually can make time in their schedule to read it. So I usually wait for that feedback first. And then I take that feedback and I write, and I mean, it's painful. Like you read through it and you're like, oh my God, this book is so bad. This book is terrible. It sucks, But what I found is like kind of like finances. Like if you're scared of your debt, just write it all down so that you can physically see what you're looking at. And then it's suddenly not so intimidating because it's not like this big looming boulder that's about to fall on you. It's like there in the open, and you kind of can see what you're dealing with. So I will write it all down, and then I organize things based on like what's most important. So I start with like a path for story structure, because that's what's going to change the entire content of the story. Then I go through and I do, okay, let's do character development. Then I go through and I do like, all right, let's do subplots. And then I go through and I do like sentence structure, and then I'm done, you know? And so for me, like starting with the big chunks and then kind of moving my way down, that makes the later passes very quick. And I can usually get through the story structure pass anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks, unless I have to rewrite the book from scratch, which I do sometimes. So
yeah, so I don't even think about like sentence structure at all when I'm doing like editing. Of course, he like starts barking right when I start talking. Because I think because I like start from a blank page, I have the chance to like fix those sentences like and just like do those edits. It's like I'm not even thinking about like it making like, oh, I'm fixing this sentence and turning it into this sentence. It's right. Like because I'm on a blank page, I'm just like making improvements and like writing it better this time because I'm not as like frantic. So because I'm usually doing
stuff side by side, and you pull like a sentence here or a sentence there, or then you just fill in with the rest of it.
Kind of. I mean, it's more. I don't think that I like. Sometimes I do. Like sometimes I'll just be like, that's a really good passage, and I'm just going to take this whole thing over. But like a lot of times, it's just like a point of reference. It's not necessarily like my first draft and my like third draft look completely different. There's like, I don't know that there is that much similar language like from the first to the third draft.
That's so interesting to me, because that's completely opposite of what I do. So
yeah, and I think that I'm also like, I'm definitely a super perfectionist, so I don't like to show my story to people when I know that there's stuff that I can fix. Like I want to fix it as best that I can. And like if I know that there's something that like doesn't work, I want to get it fixed before I show it to somebody. Like I want to get it like to a point where like if there's something that needs to be fixed, I don't know how to fix it. That's like when I show it to other people.
Right. Well, and I do want to make like a caveat here. Like I was talking about my beta readers. Don't do that.
Oh yeah.
What I do with my beta readers, you should not be doing with your beta readers, because your beta readers' time is valuable. The only reason that I get away with it is because I have a 20-year friendship with most of these people. So they understand what my writing process is, and they expect a certain level of writing. And I would never give it to them if I didn't think it was at the level that they're expecting it will be. So like when you go for your beta readers, do what Erin does, and like don't be like a crazy perfectionist. I always say if you can get your book to 90%, like get it to 90% on your own and then get it out to people. And then when you can use their beta readers to get it to like 95 or 96%, then it's probably ready to query. But like you should be doing the majority of the heavy lifting on your own.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've had that happen where I've beta read for people and it's like clearly a first draft, and I'm just like, I'm not going to finish this because you clearly have still work to do before you.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I'm not going to lie. I don't actually beta read for people anymore.
I don't really either.
It takes too much time, you know?
I mean, my beta reader situation is kind of similar. So I have one friend who's like a lifelong friend and is not a writer, but she is a reader, and she is very insightful. And, you know, she's definitely coming from a reader's perspective, which I find really valuable. And then I have another who's a writer friend who I'm usually talking to throughout the writing process, and she like gets a lot of updates. Like I'm like, oh, I'm working through chapter 2 and I'm dealing with this problem, like that. She gets those level of updates like as I'm writing. So sometimes she will see like things throughout the process as more of an alpha reader. Like if I'm working through a chapter and being like, I like don't know what's working here, I'm either going to do this or this, what do you think? And she will let me know what she thinks. But then I will give her, I usually wait as long as I can, like until it's as good as I think I can get it, until I give her like the whole thing. So she's also the only person I really beta read for.
Right. Well, like if Chrissy or Audrey came up and was like, can you read this? I would drop everything to go read it. If they do that with my stuff. But I don't really do that with like random internet people anymore. Like we kind of find our groups and you foster those relationships, you know.
I think that's so valuable. I mean, I definitely, if you don't know any writers in real life, it's definitely a struggle I think, to find good feedback. And so I do understand why people are like trying to make connections online and just sort of putting it out into the universe and trying to see if anybody will give them good feedback. But I think that once you find like a really good partner who can give you honest feedback and you know,
and you're getting a lot from it. Mm-hmm.
Yes, then I mean, I don't think that you need to send your book out to 6 people or 8 people or 20 people. You know, you only really, I think, need like 1 or 2 trustworthy people.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree with that. Now, the one thing that I will add is, first off, and I've seen this a lot with writers, like especially new writers when they're coming up and asking me for beta readers. You have to offer what you're getting in exchange. And the way that you find really good beta readers who actually give you awesome feedback and like are good at what they do is by getting yourself to that level first. So if you're one of those people who just wants to send out your manuscript to anybody who will take it, and then you decide to ignore every single bit of feedback because they all suck at giving feedback, that's on you, and you just wasted all their time. So don't do that. Like, get yourself to the point, like go on to, I recommend Scribophile, because it's kind of like an online forum where you can post chapters and like edit other people's chapters and query letters and things like that. Use that to amp up your editing game. And probably through the organic process of you trying to become a better beta reader, you're going to find some really good beta readers to latch onto. Anyway, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, I would just say, like, be selective. Like, if you're going to trade manuscripts with people, just read their first chapter. And if you're not jiving with it, say, I don't think that I'm a good match for you. Right. Sorry. And like, just don't, I think that, you know, if you read other people's chapters and they have really awesome chapters, that's like a sign that they're probably going to be able to give you awesome feedback, but also give them the opportunity to say, your manuscript isn't for me either. So even if you may read somebody's awesome chapters and be like, I would love this person's feedback. And then they might be like, I don't know if your book is my thing.
Right. And you have to just be able to accept that.
Yeah, it's definitely trial and error.
Yeah. Another area that I've actually found luck with beta readers is fanfiction.net or Archive of Our Own. That's actually where I met Audrey. And I would call her my alpha reader, I guess, because I don't really send her full manuscripts. I more send her like chapter by chapter, and she reads it and is like, oh my God, this is amazing. But then she'll usually highlight a couple things that she could see being like problems down the road. Chrissy is definitely more of like my solid beta reader. Like when I have a full manuscript, that's when I send it to Chrissy. And then we sit down and we have drinks, and she just like reams into me for an hour, and I'm just like sitting there like, okay, you know, like. But I mean, that process works well for me, but I met Audrey through, Archive of Our Own. Like I found her fan fiction and was like, wow, this is really good fan fiction. I really want to read this fan fiction. And then I like messaged her and was like, oh my God, your stuff is amazing. And then she messaged me back, oh my God, your stuff is great too. And then suddenly now we're talking about writing, and then we start sharing each other's fan fiction. And then we start realizing that like, this actually could work for original fanfic, you know, for original fiction. So that was kind of like, that moved in pretty organically just because we both liked each other on Archive of Our Own. So I recommend, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to find beta readers, but I think the big thing is like reciprocity. Like, don't expect, if you're one of those people who expect everybody to be so excited to read your stuff, but you're not willing to give anything in exchange, you're never going to find a beta reader. You know?
And I think that if you're going into a beta reading situation where you don't necessarily like know the person, either like you have like an online relationship or you have an in-person relationship, but you know, if you're going into a beta reading situation where you don't have either of those types of relationship, it's really important to like set the parameters as well and be like, this is the kind of like feedback I'm expecting. Like, this is like the level of feedback I'm expecting. These are the things that I like really want feedback on. These are the things that like, you know, I think that for me, if a lot of the times when I am giving things for feedback, I'm like, I don't want line level feedback because that's not what I'm thinking about at the moment. Like, you don't need to like be editing and adding commas and that sort of thing. Like, you know, I think you just need to be clear about like what you want and ask if that person can like actually give you that kind of feedback.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree with that. I definitely know that when I go in and look for feedback, I'm looking for anything that stands out to them, but I also specifically will be like, I'm worried about the world building. Like, what do you get an image of where they are, you know, or this character in their romance seems kind of dull to me. What do you think, you know? And then they're able to kind of like focus on that as they're going through. And that's more helpful feedback to me than if they were just like, oh, I love this one avenue where they're at the mountain. And I'm just like, yeah, no, I know that is good, but like, this is what I want, you know? So that kind of thing really helps too. So yeah. Okay. Well, we got off topic.
Yeah.
Oops.
I think that's valuable. This is valuable stuff as well.
So, well, I think that there's a lot of different perspectives. I really would love to get like a group of like 4 or 5 people from our server or something, and like see if there's like an ongoing discussion that we can have about like editing and beta readers and like what they think would be helpful, and having authors from all different avenues. I think that would be really useful to do later on, like a nice big live stream where it's almost like a panel of questions. That'd be really cool. So anyway.
So back to our planning process. I am curious, because you're like more of a planter. Do you have an ending in mind when you start writing?
Always. Yeah. And so I actually get started writing. Like I would say that my extent of plotting is I always start with a query letter, which sounds really redundant because most people write their query letters when they're ready to start querying a finished book. But I think that the query letter is like there's a reason agents ask for it. It is so intuitive to your novel. Like it goes over theme, it goes over stakes, it goes over why your character is the one to tell this story. It goes over character development that you get along the way. It has like the big linchpin thing where you're like, oh, this is what I'm going to be like discussing. Like here's the big overarching question that my character is going to have to answer. Like it's just like once you start to know how query letters actually work, it's no question to me why agents want them. I can identify 17 different things wrong with a book by reading one person's query letter.
Well, and it also gives you a really good idea of like if the author understands like what the stakes of their book are, which is like you think that's really obvious, and that like all authors know what the stakes of their books are, but it's not always the case.
That's exactly why I start with it. Like starting with the query letter helps me understand all of those major things that I actually really should be knowing before I go into a book. So I always start with a query letter, and then I come up with my 5-sentence plotting structure, which I've definitely done videos on. So go check those out if you haven't already. I don't know how to link anything on YouTube. I'm not that fancy. But it's the 5-sentence plot your novel in 5 sentences. That's what I use. So I always start with the main setting. Then I go into the inciting incident. Then I go into the 50% mark. Then I go into the 75% mark. And then I do the ending of the novel. And so like I can't get started until I have those 5 sentences. And the ending is enclosed in that. So whatever happens along the way, like I have to hit those milestones. They can meander for 25% of the book, and I don't really care. But like as long as after 25% I've gotten them to that next milestone, then I know that my pacing is on point. Otherwise, I kind of just like ramble. So So what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely know like the whole A plot. Like, I think that's what I'm plotting usually when I'm plotting, is that I'm, plotting the main plot. And then my like B and C plots are definitely more discovery. Like I know what sort of they are going to be in concept, but I don't necessarily know how they're going to play out, because that's just like part of the discovery writing for me, which is part of the reason why my like editing process takes so long, I think, is because my first draft is usually really messy. Like you think that if you have a really like a tight outline, it would be like a tight manuscript, but that's not how it works for me. I have like usually my B and C plots are like, they work, but they're only sort of vaguely connected, and the like editing process is like making sure that they are all interconnected in the way they actually need to be. So
right, for sure. Yeah, I definitely think that that's a good way to approach it. I do think that like this exemplifies like there are lots of different ways to write a novel. My method and Erin's method are not always the best options to try, but I think that experimenting with a lot of different like finding out how authors write their books and then experimenting with those methods and then seeing what works for you, that's really that's really what being a writer is, and I know that like my process 5 years ago is completely different than my process right now. Like 5 years ago, I did not use a 5-sentence structure. I would just pants everything. And then I had to rewrite one book 4 times from word 0 because I kept reading it and finding big overarching problems. So like the plot became more clear to me, but I had to write almost 200,000 words to get there. which is crazy, you know? So that was kind of the moment that I was like, wow, maybe some plotting would actually be a little helpful here.
Yeah, I mean, it's like kind of infuriating because like I do think that like the more that I've written, the like more I understand about writing, and I could have never written this book that I'm writing now like 5 years ago, and like realizing now that like the book that I had written 5 years ago like just never could have like gotten to the standards that I have now is like really infuriating, because you think like I should like be able to like just plug all of the pieces in and just like fill out the puzzle and it's a book, but it's like, oh no, you do have to like practice and put the work in, which just like, dang it, you can't just like, I mean, some people maybe like write an amazing first manuscript and it's the first thing they ever write and it's awesome. But I mean, I think for most people, you just have to like, you have to put the work in.
Yeah. I think that the people who tend to do better with their first or second or third novel are usually like crazy avid readers. Like they understand story structure inherently because they read so widely in the genre that they're writing. And I think that if you want to take a bit of a shortcut, reading is a good way to do it. But I also don't think that anything can really substitute for the physical act of writing a book. You know, like you're going to discover things about yourself. You know, you can read amazing classics all day long, but that doesn't mean that you can sit down and write a classic. You have to try, you know?
And I also think reading becomes more valuable when you're in that writing mindset. Like if you're just reading as a reader, I mean, that is still definitely really
really helpful,
useful. But I think that like once you're in that writing mindset and you're seeing the book as, you know, a set of like machinations that all work together to make a cohesive manuscript, that's like different than looking at it just like as a reader.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I definitely think that reading in conjunction with like reading craft books, like that's why craft books were so helpful to me, because they kind of like identified things that I'd seen in books that I've read, but I couldn't identify like when I was reading those books why that worked. And now when I go through and I read books, I'm like, oh, this is the inciting incident. Oh, this is the 50% mark where everything changes for the character, you know, and knowing and reading those craft books and having them kind of identify those moments and why they're important, that was what really helped me like learn, I guess.
Yeah. And I, like Dev said, I've never really read any craft books other than like technical craft books, which is more job related for me. But but I think that like when writing really clicked for me, I took a class with a professional writer, just like it was just like a recreational class that was offered by a local university, and hearing him talk about his process was very helpful. And I think that just like listening to other authors talk about their process is helpful. But I also think that like the way he talked about stakes and tension, like not necessarily as a like at this point in your book you need to have this stake set up and you need to have this tension happening, but just like how they work throughout the book, and like how, you know, you should understand that you need tension throughout your whole book. And, you know, that I think that like changed the way that I wrote.
Yeah.
Without it being like XYZ, you need to like follow this path. That was really valuable for me.
Right. Well, and I do think that one of the ways that I get like really motivated to finish a book quickly is by engrossing myself in the writing world. You know, like part of the reason that I established this Discord server is so that I would know that even when I'm not writing, I'm still thinking about writing, you know, because I'm surrounded by people who are thinking about writing or are actually writing books, you know. And so like watching people like authors talk about their video or their books on YouTube. Or their processes on YouTube, or attending like library talks of authors, or attending a class at the local university. Like all of those things to me just kind of keep my mind focused on the avenue that I've chosen to pursue as my true passion in life.
Yeah, and I think that like I didn't really start. I always knew I wanted to be a writer, and like that was always something that was on my mind, but I don't think that I ever really sort of started applying myself really like regularly and like my dog's here again. But I didn't really start applying myself, you know, until I had like writers in my life.
Yeah, I definitely think that engrossing yourself in like that kind of world and making those connections is what really, really helps in general. I mean, that gets you in the mindset no matter what, you know, and at that point, once you get started writing, it's kind of all noise, you know, like how you end up plotting your book is irrelevant in the long term, because once the book is done, the book is done. But it does help to identify what could be the least painful way to go about that for you. And I think that's really where it kind of comes down to it. Like, what method will get you through the novel fastest and best without ruining all desire you have to write? And I mean, for pantsers and plotters, that's completely different. So
yeah, and I also think that it's important, even if you have writers in your life, to recognize that their process might not be the same as you. I know that when we were in a writing group together, a lot of the people in our group were very quick writers. I am not a quick writer, and I always was trying to compare myself, like, oh, like since the last time we met, this person's written 5,000 words and I've written 500 words. And I think that like you do have to like look at other people's processes, take what works for you. Don't try to apply stuff that doesn't work for you. Like, and don't only hold yourself to your standard, and don't hold yourself to like other people's standards.
Absolutely. Well, and then to remember too, like when you're talking about our writing group, like that was a period where like I was really in the zone. And now if you see me this year, I think I've written like maybe 7,000 words of original fiction. I mean, like, and you finished like a whole book and you're working on another one, And so like, I think that just because like in that moment, one of your writing group friends might be like, breezing by you and it might seem like they're accomplishing so much, like you don't know what's going to happen in their lives 2 years from now. And if you're going slow and steady and just kind of tripping along, like I did a lot of writing and I burned myself out. I didn't want to do it this year. And I know I'll get back to it because it's like the true passion for me, but I didn't want to do it this year. And I think that was just because I didn't have like a slow and steady, like I went so hard for 8 years into like the publishing world. And now that I have a book coming out, I'm kind of like, cool, I did it,
Yeah. And I've definitely, I'm just like, I'm envious of people who can write really fast. Cause I just like, that's awesome. That's never going to be me, but I've definitely come to appreciate the fact that I'm a slow writer, because I do think that like the fact that my process is so slow, I do get a lot of time to sort of mull things over and figure things out on my own and like make things better. Like I think that if I had tried to write this book and edit it in 6 months, I wouldn't have had a lot of the like revelations about the plot and the way things, need to progress that I've had, over this 2-year process. So
yeah. Well, and I do think like the reason that I'm not really one to write over 2 years, like the book that I'm currently working on, we came up for the idea in July of 2019. And I've been working on it on and off since then. I think I'm like 23,000 words in now, which is like such a long process for me. Like usually I want a book and I'm like, it is done, And I do think that I'll hit that point with this book in the next couple weeks. Honestly, like I think I'm going to sit down and just start really like churning out words. But what I find is that when I stretch a book out that long, you have to be a plotter, because I forget what's happening. And if I'm not constantly rereading the stuff that I already wrote, I'm just like, what have I revealed? Have I talked about this? Is this redundant? Am I just like beating this information over the head of the reader because like I forgot that I already mentioned it 4 chapters ago? So I think that like for me, like it's necessity more than anything that I have to write a book fast, because my memory is just not that good. And I don't write it down because I'm not a plotter.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't work on anything else. Like between like when I'm editing, I'm really not like, I have not really worked on anything else other than this Regency manuscript for the past 2 years. So I think that if I was like flitting around from project to project and taking this long, I would have that same problem. But since like I'm basically only working on this one thing, that I sort of am pretty immersed in it, and I don't really like forget what's happening.
Okay, well, and that's pretty good, because like no, mine is all over the place, right? Like I'm just writing this and I'm like, oh my god, this is why I don't do this. Like.
And if I take too long a break, I think that that does happen to me, and I sort of like lose the thread and I just like can't get back into it, which is part of the reason why I don't take breaks to work on other stuff. Because if I like go and work on something else, I'll come back and I won't know. Like I just will like totally lose the intentionality of it, and it doesn't work for me.
Yeah, it's definitely like something that you kind of have to struggle with, And I don't know. I love talking to writers about this, like their process and like how it compares to what I did, because like I think it's very easy especially when you find some kind of success, like you finish a book and everybody tells you it's really great, or like you do get an agent, or you do get a book getting published. It's easy to be like, this is the way I did it, therefore this is right, and you don't want to be that person, because there's 1,000 different ways that something can be right. Like every book that's gotten published has been written in a different way than yours. So
yeah. And I don't know, for me, I think that like, I have to be writing and editing and perfecting for the purpose of like writing and editing and perfecting. And if I was like, I do eventually, I'm like, publication is like my end goal, but it's not like while I'm working through the book, I can't be thinking about like, oh, like this is like the book that's going to get me an agent. I just have to like work through the book itself and not necessarily be thinking about like all those other like end goals, because otherwise I think that I just like, it would like mess me up too much.
Well, and I do think that like that actually is really valuable too, because when you're not thinking about all those end goals, you're actually enjoying the process. And like that is the most inherent thing that you have to have if you're going to go into traditional publishing. Like if you don't enjoy the process of writing and editing a novel, you're never ever going to make it. Like if you have to suffer through your very first book and you're just like, this was so awful, oh my God, I hate it, and then you go to query and you're like, but at least now I'll get an agent with it. It's like, no, probably not. And if you do get an agent, you're probably not going to get published with it. So you're working on something else. Like if you don't like the physical act of writing, what are you doing here?
Well, and I also think that if you're writing and your end goal is agenting, like getting agented or getting published, and that is the thing that's on your mind, that's like what you're writing towards, there's a chance that that's not going to happen for you. And so you really need to like be able to like
put your
craft first before the like career goals.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. It's really such a fine balance. Like you want to be focused on what's going to be exciting and new, but then, I mean, that probably won't happen with the book that you're writing. I mean, it just probably won't. Like I wrote 12 books before I got my agent. I queried 3, and 2 of them were refused. So book number 10 was when I started going at it, you know, and then book number 13 or 12 was when I got my agent. Book number 12. And then now I'm up to like book number 14 or 15. And I've still discarded like 2 of them in the middle that I didn't even think were worthy enough to show my agent. You know, you just got to kind of enjoy the process. You have to enjoy the writing of it.
Yes, so, for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's almost about an hour, so that was really good. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Erin?
I don't think so. I think we covered a lot of stuff, even stuff that wasn't really part of what we came here to talk about, but it was also
so good. That was just so amazing. Okay, well, cool. Well, hey, to anybody watching, if you're not in my Discord channel, or my Discord server, you probably should be. I'll make sure that there's a link down below if you want to join us. We are all a bunch of writers at various stages of our lives pursuing traditional publication. So for all those random YouTube people who join without knowing what writing is, no, this is not for you. The server is not for you. The server is for people who are serious about their writing craft and want to be published.
And are also over the age of 18.
That was the next thing. Yep. Over the age of 18. We're not allowing any minor into this. So if you come in and are a minor or you start to act like a minor, I will boot you. I'm very, very good at booting people because I just don't like them. So anyway, the Discord server link is going to be down below. So make sure that you click on that if you want to join us. And if you're interested in joining any of my live streams, I love to interview people. I love to talk about writing. If you're interested in potentially joining and being one of those people that I interview, please send me a link, send me a message either through YouTube or the Discord channel, or you can hit me up on Twitter. Either way, I would love to hear from you guys. If you liked this, please let us know. We'll find more content like this. And I hope that you guys all have a lovely holiday season. Thanks, Erin, for joining.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everybody. Thank you.